Maine, 40% of teenagers in high school report having struggles with their mental health. About 19% of students seriously considered attempting suicide in the last 12 months. That includes more than 40% of gay, lesbian, or bisexual students. Now, these statistics all come from NAMI, Maine, the state's chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Thanks for joining us for our special Let's Talk About It, Healthy Young Minds. I'm Chris Costa. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. That's why we're pairing up with our partners at the TD Beach to Beacon 10K to talk about the mental health struggles our kids experience. This year's beneficiary of the TD Beach to Beacon is Valo, a nonprofit organization based out of Yarmouth. It takes a proactive approach to cultivate emotional well-being in Maine teens. Valo holds weekend retreats, school programs, and workshops. The nonprofit's guides help teens foster a connection to themselves and others. It helps teach empathy and understanding and gives teens a sense of belonging. There are signs right here in Maine that more teens are struggling with mental health than ever before. For example, the number of emergency room visits for suicidal ideations or suicide attempts by teenagers has increased significantly since 2018. This data you're seeing is coming from the Maine Children's Alliance Maine Kids Count report. It was released in April. In 2018, 2,180 teenagers in Maine went to the emergency room for suicidal ideations or an attempted suicide. Last year, that number was up to 2,654. I'm joined by a group of panelists to talk about why this is happening and how we can support our teenagers. Christine Morris is the clinical supervisor for the NAMI Teen Text Line. Grace Brenner is a NAMI peer support specialist. Casey Maddock is currently a student at University of Maine, and Dana Anderson is the executive director of Valo. So one of the resources for teenagers who may be experiencing struggles with their mental health is the NAMI Teen Text Line. The number is going to come up right on your screen. The number is 207-515-8398. It offers connection, resources, and mental health support to youth, teens, and young adults throughout the state. And that text line is staffed by people between the ages of 18 and 24. So Grace, speaking of which, let's start with you. In your role, right, you're hearing directly from these teenagers who text the hotline. The top 3 topics that come up are symptoms of anxiety and depression, family relations, peer relations. When you're hearing from these teenagers, how is this manifesting? How are the struggles manifesting?
It often manifests in their mental health, so how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their family members, how they feel about school, the energy they can dedicate to relationships, the energy they can dedicate to school. Really, they are just kind of confused and lost and really having a hard time. And so that manifests in many different ways.
So Christine, you're actually, to follow up on that, you're the clinical supervisor, right? You're providing support for Grace when those topics really get super serious and super heavy. What kind of advice are you giving to Grace as she helps them navigate them through the process?
Well, I don't have to give my team very much advice because they do a great job. And when things rise to a crisis level, we naturally turn them over to the crisis line, the Maine State Crisis Line. But in the interim, it's really important to reaffirm the great empathetic listening that they're doing on this text line. They're providing resources. We work together to keep finding resources and to keep trying to redirect young people back to some of their natural supports in their community.
You know, you've been doing this type of work, social work, clinical outpatient therapy for more than 20 years, right? So how are the challenges that these teenagers are facing today different from, say, 10 years ago?
I think we can all probably identify that I think one of the largest challenges on the landscape is social media. Back when I was Grace's age, I used to be able to go home and I had that boundary, but now social media has affected all of our lives, not just young people. And really it's kind of eliminated some of those safe boundaries, sometimes to just have quiet, have reflection and perspective. So I think that's been a big challenge, and then obviously the pandemic has been a large challenge too.
Well, Casey, that kind of segues to you. You have kind of grown up in the era of social media. Do you feel like you ever get a chance to take a break?
It's been something that I've had to practice and learn, something that's had to be a lot more conscious, something that you have to learn how to do. I think especially during the pandemic, we were all told, oh, go outside, go take walks, that's really good for your mental health. why would I go take a walk to turn my mind off when I could scroll on TikTok, when I could go on Instagram and see what all my friends are up to that I haven't seen in months? So especially in going to college, I've had to learn how to practice taking a true mental health break, doing something that's actually good for me, not something that just distracts me like social media does.
Dana, that's kind of the whole point of Follow's retreats, right? Is to unplug, connect with humans again instead of connecting through a device. Why do you feel like that approach works?
I think the important piece here is that, I would just back up a step and say, I think, as Casey has reflected, is that our teens 10 years ago when we started on retreats, they looked at us and said, this first retreat, and they said, what are we going to do with our phones? And so they, I think, just like many adults, don't want to feel this addiction and this reliance on it. And so if we look 10 years ago at these Volo teens who kind of paved the way, created a foundation, it's become a part of our culture. And to Casey's point about this kind of practicing, our retreats give teens a chance to practice for a whole weekend. And so their phones are in the rooms they're staying in. And we agree that when we're together, the whole point is being together. And so if we were to be together and be looking at our phones, it would defeat the purpose. I think through being unplugged, they're learning ways to connect genuinely through conversation, just conversation. And it's, just as scrolling is kind of a new muscle that a child gets as soon as they pick up a phone. Talking in person is a muscle that they just haven't stretched. And so when you layer the pandemic in there, where they didn't have many opportunities with the exception of being with their family, but really to talk with peers, we need to help them learn how to stretch that muscle and practice it.
Why then is it the act of scrolling and doing something that's engaging with your peers, why is that exacerbating things like anxiety and depression and other issues of mental health?
I think it's twofold. I think it depends what they're scrolling through, but oftentimes human beings can't help but compare ourselves. And so whether it's looking at what someone else got to do, what someone else looked like, an opportunity someone else had, we might have a little self-talk there that's not healthy and makes us feel that anxiety of like, why am I not that pretty or that involved? And I think, the other piece of it is just having the connection with a peer. There's nothing that replaces that. So it's amazing that the internet connects us to people all around the world, and that includes young people. And it doesn't replace what it means to be in person. Just like if we were doing this interview on Zoom, it would feel different.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Grace, how much does social media come up with the teens who are texting the hotline?
It comes up sometimes. Definitely bullying, online bullying, I would say, is mentioned frequently. Things that maybe start in school and then continue kind of online bullying and things like that. And also something that I've dealt with is peers or texters that also engage in like online gaming. And so then those relationships, a lot of those friendships, they've never met the person, but they're close with them. And so I think with social media, our ability to make friends outside of just who we see in person has really grown. And that can bring, it has its strengths and its challenges.
What does the online bullying look like? I think I've heard this term a lot. I know that it exists, but what does it look like? Because when I was growing up with social media, that was not something that I had to deal with. Any of you can answer that.
I'd say definitely comments and things like that.
About a person's appearance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, what other types of things are we talking about?
In speaking with teens, I've heard them talk about when they're posting, the amount of likes that they get really correlates to their measure of self-worth. So if they post something and it's not getting what they deem an appropriate number of likes, then that affects their self-esteem. They measure their self-worth by how many people are liking their posts or not liking their posts. Also, I think there's a tendency to jump on a bandwagon on social media that they'll talk about, where maybe somebody might say something unkind, and then people they don't even know are jumping in and then also reiterating those unkind messages.
Piling on?
Piling on. So I think both of those things are definitely some of the bullying that is going on.
You're nodding your head, Casey. That's been your experience too?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people who if they post a picture and it doesn't get the number of likes that they want, or it doesn't get the number of comments that they want, they'll take it down. I mean, I've done it too, I'll admit it. If something that I post doesn't receive what I want, I'll take it down, maybe post it later, see if like putting it back out there again gets me what I want. And it's really unhealthy because we're learning, you know, from such a young age. I think I got Instagram when I was 9. You learn from that super young age that if something isn't received the way you want, then it's bad, then you're bad, and what you have to share, you know, isn't right, and you know, you need to present yourself differently.
So then for any of you, how have you, with either your peers, the people you work with, the teens that you work with, how do you combat that? What's the advice you give to a teen who is relying on those likes for their self-worth?
In our program, I think what comes to mind when Casey's speaking is this notion of internal versus external validation, like what's making you feel good. And in our program, part of the heart of the program is having conversations, and they may be these prompted, deeper conversations, or they may be just sitting next to someone on the couch casually. But I think, you know, there's research about, you say hello to someone just passing them on a sidewalk, and it's almost like the endorphins of running. And so I think about this value of sitting next to someone on a couch, and they're seeing you like physically and also understanding you. I think the more that young people can be in connection and real conversation with other people and have this internalized sense of worth instead of this externalized sense of worth, we're all the better for it. And I really think that that's something that can ripple out in the most genuine way, that a teen does not need to be on our program. Hopefully the teens in our program are going out and having conversations in person, and certainly hopefully not, you know, piling on the negativity of social media, but really more importantly, recognizing that it doesn't take much to pause, and even in the hallways of a high school to look at someone and say hi, or how's your day, or even a smile. I think the more proactive ways we can help kids connect and recognize that it's a virtuous cycle for not only themselves but the person they're interacting with.
Something that we really focus on the text line is connecting people with in-person supports, whatever that looks like, because we want to be there for them, but we are not in person, and it can be a challenging line at times because we're a peer, but we're not a friend, and we're also not a mental health clinician. So we have to make sure that not only are we holding the appropriate boundaries with the person, but that we also help them hold boundaries in their life. So a lot of the conversations we have are around how to talk to people in your life. Who can you connect with? Who can you trust? Who have you trusted in the past? As well as if there's someone that is depleting your energy, someone that is hurting you, what boundaries can you set? How have we set boundaries in our lives, and how can we set an example for the person we're talking to move forward and set boundaries for themselves?
We were talking about boundaries on social media. And how did you have that mental shift to realize these likes do not tie into my self-worth, and these comments that we're talking about are simply just bullying, they're not real about me? How did you reconcile that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was realizing that social media is sort of like a drug. It keeps you coming back for more, right? So once I get those likes, or I do get those comments, it feels good, but the feeling goes away and I constantly come back for more. And it's the same thing with, you were talking about internal versus external, that external validation either from a good grade or somebody telling you did a good job. It feels good, but it fades. And so through, you know, going through years of counseling and sort of rewiring how I think about things, I've had to learn that I'm the one who decides whether I'm good enough. I'm the one who decides that what I'm doing is right and good. And if I can believe that for myself, that's what matters more than any external validation could ever tell me.
But it took you going through counseling to realize that.
Yeah. I think that, you know, between the counseling and also like my time being on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, it sort of gave me that mental headspace to think that through. And I think that being in high school and having depression, having anxiety, it sort of clouds your ability to see that clearly. You know, I never thought I was good enough to decide who I was and who I wanted to be. But through counseling and through medication, I was able to, the clouds sort of parted and I could process it.
You were going to add something, Dana.
Yeah, I think one of the, you know, there are silver linings of the pandemic, and I even think a year ago, Mental Health Awareness Month, what would that have looked like, or 3 years ago? I think the pandemic, because of, as we come out of it, exposing the incredible incredibly negative impact that this isolation had on everyone, and especially young people and older people, that it's opened this up for a conversation. So I think even when Casey was in high school 3 or 4 years ago, probably looked different. What we're seeing with the teens we're working with now is the discussion of anxiety and depression. It's been normalized, and so 10 years ago, I had kids who absolutely had anxiety and depression. Many of us do, but it even in a safe space wasn't the same to talk about it. And now I think that society is recognizing the importance of surfacing these feelings and how we process and how we get support. I have hope that if, had you been in high school now, it would even have been a different trajectory, because you would have a chance to feel the not only the support around you, but also that it's been normalized and that it's not something to be ashamed of, and that it doesn't define who we are.
Since you brought it up, I want to go to the quote that Valo has on its website from the Teens Tell All. And this first one has to do with parents, and I'm going to read it here. This is from a teen who says, "I want someone who supports me, but doesn't try to fix all my problems. I want my parents to ask me what I need instead of assuming they know. Sometimes all I want to do is talk it through." But there's information from NAMI that says teens aren't reaching out to adults the way that they used to. So I guess my first question is for Casey, because you've most recently gone through this. Why do you think that is? What do your peers say about an adult's ability to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm lucky enough to have very supportive parents who were always there for me. And looking back, a lot of people ask me, why didn't you talk to your parents about what you were experiencing sooner? And I think it's because when you have really loving, caring people in your life, they don't want to see you hurt. They wanted to see happy, smiley, successful Casey. And so firstly, I feel like I'm letting them down by telling them that I'm unwell, by telling them that I need extra support and I can't do it on my own. It feels like a weakness. And secondly, a lot of people, when you speak to them, when they don't understand what you're going through, are so quick to offer you solutions. It's so simple if you just do this. It's so simple if you just do that. And it doesn't feel simple. It feels so confusing and large and twisted in your mind. Sometimes you don't want the answers. You just want to feel heard.
So Christine, what would you say, right, as you guys are collecting this data?
Actually, the data came from the 2021 Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey that's done for high schoolers and middle schoolers across the state. And overall, what they were showing was that teens were reporting that they were feeling less connected to the adults in their schools as well as the adults in their community, and feeling like people weren't caring for them. Now, that was partially still pandemic times, so I'm sure that's part of the withdrawal feelings like that. But I think that for students, just like what Casey said, they don't necessarily want advice, they want to feel heard. And I think the hard part is for parents and for educators is that, in mental health services, I would always tell people, you have to put your mask on in the airplane before you can help someone else. Well, as a mom, as somebody who's married to an educator, like, we're trying to, get our mask on. It makes it hard to help the next person. So I think part of what we're seeing is that we all need support and care, and I think adults are struggling too, and that makes it harder for us to be available in the appropriate ways, in the ways that young people want.
I think I could speak to both these points as someone who speaks to teen texters that text into us. I would say on one hand, familial relationships are a big struggle for many people that we talk to. What you mentioned about, how am I going to be perceived if I bring this up, or I've brought this up and it hasn't gone anywhere. My parents haven't believed me, this and that.
So when we're talking about parents not being as available for all the reasons, right? Whether it's a parent or whether it's an educator, any adult, right? What advice could you give to an adult right now so that they could be making space for their kids?
It's okay to not have the answers. And it's okay to tell your child, your student, I don't know, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to be with you as we find them. And I think that's the hard part as an adult. It is hard to admit to your child, a child that you're working with. I don't know. I don't have the answers, and this is scary. But if you can do that, then I think it creates a space that you can listen and be open, and you may not need to be the one that has the answers. Casey probably had a lot of the answers. Grace probably has a lot of the answers. They just need the space and the support to find them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did it come
It's
back?
yes.
All right.
So something that I think is really beneficial with the peer teen text line, and that I think plays into familial dynamics as well as opening up to someone in your real life, whether it's a teacher or a parent or a family member, is that you probably have to see them again. You probably have to go and face them again. And so sitting down and saying, hey, this is what I'm struggling with, and then you have to have dinner together, it's like that there's a lack of distance. It's like, how are they going to react? How is this going to change our relationship?
Is it going to be awkward?
Is it going to be awkward? And so that is one of the biggest strengths of the peer text line, in my opinion, is that although many of the texters that we talk to do come back, we have people that talk to us pretty frequently. If you don't want to, you don't have to, and you can stop the conversation at any point. And so it's anonymous, except in crisis situations, of course. But it's anonymous. They don't have to talk to us again. They don't have to face us in real life. Right. We don't know who they are if we were to happen to cross the street together. And so I think that's a big strength of the program, is that it removes that, like, oh, how. There is still some of that, how are they going to react? Because that's human nature. When we have something personal and we're going to be vulnerable, it's still hard to be. But they don't have to talk to us again. Whereas with a parent, they do have to face them again. And then picking up on the second point that we brought up about solving things versus offering kind of an empathetic ear, I would say that's something that we work with on the line as well. Is there are some people that come to us directly with something that they need solved and they want us to solve it, and so we work on that with them. But throughout that process, we talk about the feelings. We really try and offer a space for them to reflect, and oftentimes the conversation goes on and we get away from the original problem they brought to us and we get to something deeper within them. And so there's a broad spectrum of what we do, but there's a variety. There are people that come and say, I have this issue, what advice would you give me for this? And then we have people that say, I just need someone to listen. So there's a scope of conversations that we have that touch both of what we were talking about there.
But it sounds like as long as somebody is accessing those thoughts and feelings, maybe some of the deeper stuff does get addressed.
In my experience, yes.
I wanted to bring that up because, kind of the sort of elephant in the room, we don't have any teen males on this panel. And there's a very interesting quote from Follow. And it says, as a boy and an athlete, it's hard for me to open up about how I'm feeling. I feel like I don't want to share. There's a stereotype of strength and perfection. If you show vulnerability, you won't be that ideal person you're supposed to be. Showing our struggles is seen as weakness. I mean, generally, we can say that teen males and men in general are less likely to talk about their mental health. How do you address these with the teen boys who come to your retreats or the school programs about their reluctance to share?
I will say that we don't address it always directly, and we first see what's in the room. And I think what's been really important, whether it's in a school program or on our weekend retreat program, is to have older teens in the room and they become the role models. And I will say from that first retreat, not only did they unplug, but it was the kids who identified as he, him who first opened up. And I think that was telling. It was like, we can bombard ourselves with society's messages about masculinity and the expectations, and they internalize it. And if you give a space where it's clear that a part of the culture is going to be to share what you're feeling, and it's not going beyond this circle, I think males are just as likely to open up. And so what we've seen is, as long as there is a model in the room, they are so on board, and really I think it's like so much of this, that practicing of it, it's like, whoa, I just shared, I'm still standing, I'm still breathing, my heart is still beating, and I might even feel a little bit better. So I feel like I don't want to diminish the fact in society of what was said in that quote. And I also remain optimistic and hopeful that we can continue to find different spaces, which quite frankly could simply be in the lunchroom, that one male sitting next to another male, or on the soccer field, or on the stage, where there are places that kids feel an expectation of how they're supposed to be or what they're not supposed to do. And I do think this kind of exposing of the mental health crisis is just another invitation for everyone, no matter what their chosen gender is, to step forward and say, I'm hurting, I'm imperfect, I could use some help.
And so, but it sounds like you saying when there is somebody in that room who models the behavior, makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable about opening up and sharing what they're going through.
Absolutely.
We need more people then to be open about their mental health struggles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We have two really phenomenal male. I have two phenomenal male coworkers that work on the text line that I wish could be here, because I think that they would offer an incredible perspective. And I also think what you bring up about gender is important. And when you mentioned the pandemic earlier, not only did it expose issues of loneliness, but it brought out social economic issues as well that I think really contribute to what a lot of the teens we talk to are dealing with. Maybe the reason they can't talk to their parents is because their parents work 2 jobs in order to afford, the lifestyle they have. So maybe they're taking care of their younger siblings, and then they can't do as well in school. I mean, there are so many factors that need to be considered, because mental health does not occur in a vacuum, and it is always influenced by social economic factors around us: gender identity, sexual identity, race, ethnicity, religion, things like that.
Any final thoughts or pieces of advice for parents and teens who are dealing with a mental health struggle?
I think the key piece is to understand that this is a normal part of being a human being. And if I think about from a family's perspective, a parent's perspective, I think the best thing you can do is listen and be attuned to where your child is in that moment, and don't be afraid to say, what do you need from me? And I think from a young person to just be aware that you are, as alone as you may feel, you are not alone, that there's so many of us in society who are navigating challenges around our mental health, that the best thing you can do is to share it, because not only will it help you, but it's likely going to help somebody else too.
Casey?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I would say to somebody who feels like they're struggling is that it gets better. Like, depression and anxiety are these crafty things that they give you this tunnel vision. This is my life. There will only be rainy days. There will only be sadness and hurt. But there is so much more to life than you being depressed. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There are sunny days ahead. And the more that you share how you're feeling, the more those clouds will start to part.
Grace?
I would agree with what Dana said, is that teenagers in particular are going through a very difficult time in their life with so many changes, socially, emotionally, psychologically, physically, that it can feel very isolating, which is what we almost opened talking about, loneliness we talked about. And that, as you mentioned, as cheesy it can be, they aren't alone. There's a reason that the 4 of us are here today. If mental health wasn't an issue, we wouldn't be in the positions that we're in to advocate for it. And so there are so many people that do this work because there's so many people that go through it. And so they aren't alone at all. There is support out there. The text line's out there. We would love to hear from them. And yeah, I agree that they will get through it, because there's always something that can be done. Again, we wouldn't be here if there wasn't changes to be made and if there wasn't hope.
Christine?
I would say similarly, the more we can normalize these conversations, the more that we can have them openly and honestly, the better it is for everybody, not just youth, but adults as well. And I think that, again, it goes back to taking that first step. It's scary. It's scary, I think, to cross that threshold, to admit how you're feeling, to be vulnerable, creating a safe space for that, whether it is connecting with somebody that you admire at school, somebody who's mentored you at school, or your parents. Just find that one person that you're willing to take that risk, to be vulnerable with. And don't stop trying, because there is hope even when it feels hopeless. And And your mental health matters as much as your physical health matters. And any parent would do anything for their child's physical health, same thing for their mental health. It's just getting over that initial fear of that first step, those first conversations.
If you saw someone wearing a bandage around their head, you'd know they have a head injury. Same idea, right? We just can't see the bandage.
Right.
Got it. Thank you very much to all of you for being here, for sharing all of your insight. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for spending the time. And thank you for watching Let's Talk About It, Healthy Young Minds. If you or anybody you know is currently struggling with mental health, there are resources out there for help. Maine's crisis hotline is available 24/7. That number is on your screen, 1-888-568-1112. You can call or text that number at any time to get immediate help. And again, there's the NAMI Maine Teen text line. That number is 207-515-8398. You can talk to Grace. It is open every day from 2 in the afternoon until 10 o'clock at night. Now, if you use this QR code, this will take you to a long list of mental health resources right here in Maine. You just open up your phone to your camera and hover over that QR code. The list available breaks down a number of resources by county. And as all of our panelists have said, you are never alone.